Welcome to Board Certified, expert interview episodes about medical licensing exams and healthcare careers. I'm Cassandra with Achievable, and we offer affordable adaptive online prep courses for the USMLE Step 1, MCAT, PTCE, MPTE, CSCS, and others. Each course contains everything you need to succeed, including comprehensive study guides, video lessons, thousands of practice questions powered by our memory enhancing algorithm, and full-length practice exams. You can try any course for free at achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to save 10%. Now, let's get started. Today we have Conor Heeney with us, and Conor, I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Connor. I'm based in Liverpool in the UK. So I work at the Liverpool John Moores University. So I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I've been a S&C coach now for roughly around about 11 years. I've sort of worked along different sports, different pathways. So now at the university, my main role is split across sort of teaching and then also professional services, specifically being a performance sports science coordinator at the university. So we will look after anywhere from 200 to 250 athletes, and that's across every single sport you could sort of think of, professional sport, Olympic, Paralympic programs, and athletes are at the university as well, alongside a load of different other contracts, such as like the Premier League referees and whatnot. But I'm sure we'll get that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. So, today's episode is just kind of going through the different certifications for strength and conditioning and kind of their differences and how to utilize those in different career paths. So, to start us off, can you just maybe introduce us to the different certifications out there and maybe the ones that you have that you've earned and your pathway and motivation for obtaining those?
Yeah, so mine sort of started, I suppose, if we go back a little bit. So I decided to go to university, did a sport and exercise science degree program. Sometimes in the USA that might be called like a kinesiology degree as well. In the UK, we specialize slightly in with sport and exercise science. From there, then I specialized again in strength and conditioning, did some internships within my undergraduate degree, and then went on to a postgraduate degree in strength and conditioning. So that was a 1 year postgraduate degree. While I was doing that, it became very apparent that for me, I wanted to work in elite sport at some level at some point. And as I went through my undergraduate, I realized that was probably more in a coaching perspective, and then finally coming upon strength and conditioning. And then you find out very quickly that having a degree program isn't enough. What used to be enough just to have an MSc is no longer anymore. Now you need some sort of accreditation, and some jobs even require a PhD, or at least it's very much a desirable. And part of that, as I said, is the accreditation process. So while I was doing my master's degree, I looked at, for me, the sort of easiest route to get an accreditation that would be a prerequisite to get a role within the industry and what would be accepted within the industry, because you can sort of separate into essential and desirable characteristics or qualifications or things that an employer would look for, and accreditations is one of those. And I'll go into a little bit more as to the details or different accreditations you can get. But the first one I got just straight out of my master's degree was the NSCA CSCS, so Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. It was the one that was probably the easiest to get at the time, because it's just an online course where there's two parts to it. There's scientific foundations and more of a coaching aspect, and you could just go to a facility, you sit down, do it, and it takes about 2 hours to do, and then you can, at the end of that, either get the pass or the fail. Luckily, I passed that, and then you've got essentially your foot in the door to at least apply for the jobs, not necessarily get the job, but at least apply because it's part of their essential criteria. So once I had the CSCS, I managed to get a job at the university working with some of our Olympic programs, a task contract. So any high level athletes or GB level athletes or developmental Great Britain athletes. And then once I got that, then I was required to, if I wanted to progress in that role, then get a UK Strength and Conditioning Association accreditation. And so that is a little bit more difficult. That's a four-part process. It's in person. There's three practical elements to that with an MCQ multiple choice questionnaire. So it took me then a year after my master's program to finally get that. But then in the UK, very much so, when you've got your UKSCA, it's the ASCC, so Accredited Strength and Conditioning Coach. That is essentially the gold standard in terms of prerequisite qualification to become a strength and conditioning coach. There are others that you can get into, and if you especially want to work at the highest level of elite sport, especially the Premier League in terms of football or soccer. But yeah, those are the main two that you typically tend to see in the UK. It's either the NSCA CSCS or then the UKSCA ASCC.
Yeah, that makes sense. You happen to have gotten both. Do some people choose one versus the other, or is it typically like a dual process?
No, it's more likely. It depends on the individual and depends where they are at what stage that they're in. You might have some individuals that don't go to university that might just go straight into getting the UKSCA because as part of it, you have a lot of military guys typically tend to go for the UKSCA. It's part of their prerequisite for some of the jobs working in that field. But yeah, it very much depends whether that individual wants to just get that first string to the bow and that prerequisite straight off the bat and get the CSCS, or they just want to commit straight away after university or during university to get the UKSA, because the UKSA would be a higher form of qualification in the UK. It's regarded as such. It just depends what route that individual wants to go down, because it would take, depending on where the person's at, I would say if they're not doing a master's degree in strength and conditioning, it's probably going to take them at least a year to prep for that process for the UKSCA. Whereas the CSCS, depending if you come straight out of university and you've done a science-based course, especially a sports science-based course, you should be able to spend, not, I don't want to make it too low, but you shouldn't have to spend that much time. You essentially need to learn the information that's through a lot of the content that the NSCA provides. And once you have a good memory of a lot of that content, then you should be in a really good place to be able to get that. So it sort of depends where the person is in relation to one, their location, and two, how competent they are in relation to strength and conditioning.
Yeah, that's a good overview of the differences. And it's interesting too, from my understanding, in the US, the CSCS is kind of like the sought after certification, and that's kind of the gold standard. So, depending on what direction you want to go with it in the UK, it kind of seems more like a stepping stone to that next level.
It is essentially. So we just had one of our interns come through the program, and I say from day one, especially with our senior interns who are on a level 7 master's program, if you can just get that CSCS done by the time you finish your degree program, you're in such a better position than a lot of other people in other universities or even at the same university. I think the key thing is when I said location, if you wanted to work in the States, don't worry about doing the UKCA. It's almost like there's no actual benefit to you spending that year learn. The reason why it takes so long is because you have to demonstrate weightlifting competency, so the snatch and the clean and jerk, and you have to demonstrate that to pretty precise competency. So it needs to look perfect. You need to memorize all 72 points in order and say that almost like lyrics to a song. So it takes a lot of time, and you might have someone who doesn't really know the lifts or hasn't really got the mobility, so it can be a really long, drawn-out process for them. And additionally to that, part of that UKSCA is to put together a case study of an athlete you've worked with and detail the 6 months that you've been working with them. So again, there's a prerequisite for that. But yeah, if you're looking to work in the United States, then the CSCS is absolutely that is the gold standard. I think the question mark I've always had is to work in elite sport in the US, a multiple choice questionnaire and that being the gold standard has never really sat that well. But if that essentially is the requirements to work in elite sport in the US, so I suppose you can only work within the bounds of what the job market asks for. So yeah, it's funny how it sort of differentiates or differs between the UK and US in terms of that.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. Obviously, with a lot of different jobs and different industries, experience is the best teacher, right? So, Are there any concepts or tactics that you learned from these certifications that either you use like all the time or stuff that you're like, that's never even come up?
Sure. I think the where the CSCS does come very handy is that you have to have a very good knowledge, or at least a extractable knowledge in terms of a multiple choice questionnaire about the scientific principles and scientific understanding, the molecular mechanisms, the coaching principles, the gym design, whatever it might be, or even the nutritional recommendations for something. So I think as a result of doing the assessment, it requires you to have a very, not necessarily very deep knowledge about any one area, but a very good knowledge across all areas that is responsible an S&C coach needs for their scientific knowledge. So it's not that you draw upon necessarily any one thing, but a lot of the questions that I'll ask a lot of our coaches is why are you doing the things you're doing? And you can really only answer that question if you've got the base level foundational knowledge from scientific principles of which you would learn in the textbooks and through that process of doing that. I think that's where the CSCS does a really good job. I think the only downside of it is then that practical element is somewhat limited because you're only getting practically assessed via a remote MCQ. So when we talk about experience, I would always encourage every single person, the CSCS is only going to get you through the application process in terms of a essential criteria. It will not guarantee you to get any job. You'll still need to be able to prove and showcase and highlight how good and effective you are as a coach and be able to prove that then practically if you go into a second stage of an interview where you've done the application process, curriculum, let's say CV, and then a cover letter to get you into that interview, and then that's where the personality, character, and an understanding of the role and how you can integrate within the system, the organization, and more importantly how you can develop athletes and maybe a proven methods of that.
Yeah, you've kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but like the different career paths that people can take and how that might look different depending on the certifications that people want to go for or obtain. What do those different career pathways look like?
Yeah, and yeah, brilliant question because I think this is probably something that gets confused the most because I think America is exactly the same as the UK. I'm an accredited strength and conditioning coach with the NSCA and with the UKSCA. I couldn't go into a local gym and just train people. So I'm covered under the university, and if we were to work in a private organization, I'm covered under their insurance and whatnot. But because I don't have a personal training qualification, I can't just train your average person. I don't have the qualification to be able to do that. So the important thing is to understand what, again, it comes back to what role do you want? What career are you looking to go into? And if it is working with general populations, if it is working with tactical military populations, special populations, elderly, whatever it is, more than likely there will be a specific path that you need to go down. So if you're in the US and you want to work in the local, I don't know, name me, Cassandra, what's a big sort of gym chain in the US?
Oh, at like Planet Fitness or
Planet
something like
Fitness,
that.
perfect. So if you want to work in Planet Fitness, a lot of the time they probably won't accept the CSCS. They would need to for you to have, based on their insurance, a CPT course or certified personal trainer course, and you can get that a load of different ways through the NASM, through the NCSA. So it requires you to know what are the qualifications that's going to get you into that pathway because just because you have what seems like a higher level qualification doesn't mean that you can work in that industry because they require their own qualifications and certifications to be able to do that.
I think it is easy to assume that it's kind of this one size fits all
Sure.
blanketed certification that can kind of go anywhere. So I think that's really interesting. And you mentioned, like the tactical military type of pathway. What does that entail? And are there specific certifications for that as well?
Yeah, so I know obviously in the States, and again, it depends on the job role. So some may just accept that the NSCA, CSCS is the qualification they want. However, there are more specialized courses that you can take through the NSCA. So there is a tactical one, and there is a special population one, and I believe there's another working with a different type of population. But it just, again, it might not be an essential qualification they need for the role, but for sure it'll be part of their desirable characteristics that they want from the employee. So again, it comes down to if you've got 20 people applying and they've all got the same CSES, how are you going to stand out for the crowd that's just going to even get you to that interview process? Because more than likely, a really good one we had not too far gone is a women's WSL, which is the highest level, one of their academy roles came up, and it was only part time, and there was 110 people that applied. Four of those had PhDs. Five of those people were heads of performance. So it's a really saturated business, and it's not that the jobs aren't out there, but the minimum level and minimum criteria is just going to keep going up and up and up depending on what the role is. So again, it's not that you have to have it, but definitely it's going to help you if you are looking to go into a tactical military type of role, that you would need those qualifications. So a lot of this is we talk about a needs analysis with the athletes and understanding sort of where they're at, where they need to be, what does that look like. It's very much the same for someone working in their career. So where are you at now? Where do you want to get to? What are the steps along the way, and what are the qualifications, experiences? And that almost requires a lot of research from the individual in terms of, okay, if I wanted to work in ballet, I would need this qualification or this experience. If I wanted to work in football, I would probably need my UEFA B. That might really help me stand out. And so UEFA B is like a technical coach's qualification. And if again you wanted to work in the tactical side of things, maybe the NSCA tactical qualification would be a really beneficial thing for you to have. But again, it very much the horses for courses. Get the thing that's going to help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah, there's so many different pathways within this industry that you can really go down, and you really have to get specific to know which one you want to go to. Because if you get into something and you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to do this type of role, I mean, that's a lot of time and money that you wasted. And so I think that's also why internships are probably the best way to get your foot in the door and see what type of strength and conditioning coach or role that you want to get into.
Without a doubt. So, like for example, at university, I think we've now had through the door roughly around 65 different sports. So coming to those sort of organizations, so there's a lot of, I believe the private sector in America is a really, I wouldn't even say growing, it's fairly established in terms of different individuals, different people coming into those organizations from a private perspective. So if those people are looking for a career in strength and conditioning, and a lot of the times I was in the same boat. I didn't really have a clue. I'd done a little bit of coaching when I was younger. That was mainly just putting out cones, and that's about it for the head coach when I was about 14. But then I knew I'd done a little bit of coaching. I enjoyed sport. I'd done science in my A levels, which is almost like high school for you, I believe. And so then you do a sport and exercise science program at university, and still it seems like it might be specialized, but it's the most broad thing you can think of because it's got psychology, biomechanics, physiology, nutrition, S&C. Like there's so many branches of that, at which when you go into one of those courses, you can start to figure that out. So when you've even figured out a little bit of a route that you want to go down the training side of things, then that opens out another 20 to 30 branches of what sport do you want to go down, what population do you want to go down, what age group do you want to go down. And so you start to find, and it starts to pop up because you have so many people in the field now that people can specialize. So if you had a real big interest in rhythmic gymnastics, for sure now there's jobs out there where you will be top of the pile for that. If you've got an interest in golf, you would probably want to start to look at, those golf jobs, and there's absolutely a career and a pathway for that because sport has blown up in terms of the amount of backroom staff that are now responsible for the taking care of those athletes. So it's it's really interesting space at the moment, but super competitive. Yeah, really competitive.
I feel like that's a good segue into what I wanted to ask next, which is talking about professional athletes, but even like Olympic athletes. What
Mhm.
does that pathway look like, and how can you start down that road?
Yeah, so it depends with the route that you want to go down. So it depends if you want to go down the professional route. It depends if you want to go down the Olympic route. So let's say, for example, in the UK, we have the UK Sports Institute. So typically, if you wanted to be a practitioner, you want to be a strength and conditioning coach working with Great Britain hockey, for example, they would be looking for some of the best practitioners in the country to be looking after some of the best athletes in the country. So they are going to be looking for at least 5 years experience. They're going to be looking for a master's degree, and those would be minimum qualifications experiences they'd be looking for. A previous track record in high performance sport, whether you've been working across different sports such as football or rugby or whatever it might be, and then you can almost think about working back from that role. So if that's the route that you want to take and you want to work with Olympic programs, okay, so how can you work back from that, and potentially then you build up your career working in academy football at a really low level, and then you build up your way through the categories in football, for example, alongside getting your education, getting your undergraduate, getting your postgraduate degrees. And then by the time you finish your master's program, you should have maybe 1 year's experience, sort of either interning or some part-time experience. And typically then that will lead to hopefully getting a full-time gig somewhere in a slightly higher rung, and so on and so forth. A lot of roles, however, can come straight and directly through internship programs. So the amount of individuals that we've had that have come through the university, done internship programs at GB cycling or GB boxing or, professional clubs, and they've been an intern with the under 16s, for example, and then they get a casual role with that club, and then that leads to them getting a under 18s role and under 20s. So the main thing is just trying to find any experience that you can possibly get that is somewhat related to what the role wants from you. So if the role is, we could think about the next role that you want. If the role is, I want you to be able to lead group sessions to youth footballers, and you need to be able to do testing, you need to be able to do monitoring, you need to be able to work with a physio and a multidisciplinary team or a nutritionist or whatnot, there's nothing to say that the skills that you would develop from working in a Planet Fitness and doing classes there isn't absolutely fantastic experience, because you're still going to be developing the skills to be able to then take those and take that confidence and leadership ability and working with different personalities, and apply that directly into more of a professional setting. So it all just depends on where the person's at the moment and how far away they are from that role that they want, and how they can most easily get the experience, skills, and qualifications that get them to the next bit, or get them to the next role. So it just requires a lot of self-reflection and understanding where you're at, and then potentially, you start to look at your network, and I like to call it back scratching. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So there's a lot of that happens in the industry. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not here to debate that, but for sure, there's a lot that is required there from a giving up time and resource, because if at the moment you don't have the skills, so your commodity, if you don't have the skills, is your time and effort. So if that's what you can give to someone, fantastic, and then you can build the skills of which then you can apply for the next role.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I think networking is in every industry, and it's how you can gain experience from people who have been doing it longer and gain exposure to the things that you want to participate in, or, just be able to get to another level in your career, right?
Absolutely, and I think just on that as well, it's being quite clever with who you're giving time to. So at the university, I think our track record is about 95% of people who come through the internship will go on to work in either in a PhD or sports science or an elite sport role. So think about, is the place that I'm putting time and effort into, are they gonna put it back into me to help me go into that. Because, as I said, an internship is only as good at how effective it is at getting people employed. If you go into an internship and for the past 10 years it's only had 3 people go into elite sport, it's probably not a very good internship for you. It's not going to get you there. So you need to, again, consider if that is the route you want to go down, start to highlight those clubs, organizations, and people that have a track record of, okay, if I am an undergraduate or graduate coach or starting out from scratch, maybe if I put my resources into them, there's going to be a follow on effect from that. So you can start to be a little bit clever about who and where you go.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. People are starting these careers when they're a bit younger and maybe they're a little naive about the ins and outs of the industry. So there could be maybe a little desperation there where they're just like, whatever I can do to get in. So I think that's great advice, like really thinking it through and seeing how it can kind of move your career along.
Yeah, so I think in terms of work and career, I don't know who I stole this from. I stole it from someone, but I always tell my interns about the 5 Ps in terms of what you should focus on. And potentially, there's no order to them in terms of what's most important. It just depends on what your morals, character, and opinion is. So the first one's progression. So is the job going to get me to where I want to get to? The second one is pay. Does it pay well? So some people are really orientated by money and they don't really worry about much else. A third P is purpose. Do you go to work and think that the role that you're doing is very aligned to who you are as a person, the goals that you want, the people you want to support? You have personal life, because elite sport isn't a particularly friendly place if you want to have your weekends. So you've got to consider that as well. So I always think about it like that, in terms of, yes, it might not have to pay. You don't particularly love going to work every single day. You might have to work weekends, but the progression is it will get you there in the long run. So it's just about trying to balance that as much as you can. People was the fifth one. People. Do you enjoy working with the people around you? Because sometimes that can be the biggest thing.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a huge one too. And a lot of times underestimated because, and again, going back to like that networking piece, a lot of people that maybe you intern with, not just who you're interning for, those people become your colleagues later down the line. And I think it's important to maybe establish those relationships as early as possible.
Yeah, for sure. Like the nature of elite sport, you sort of everyone's almost in it for themselves but working together at the same time. So if you can really start to build great relationships of people who sort of understand that environment as well, because not necessarily the nature of it is like you might be working late nights, or you might be having to work on sociable hours. You're going to do stuff that is above and beyond the role, and a lot of times the people around you might be working jobs that don't necessarily have that, so they don't necessarily understand what that's like. But for sure, the people that you work with, and especially on undergrad, like in degree programs, they tend to be your network that you will then rely on as you go through your career. So I'm always on the phone to people who are working, whether it's the Premier League, whether it be Olympic sport. So they tend to be your network that will then either help you progress through your career and will help each other, or you can start to build up the next generation of individuals. So I suppose that might feed back into what we talked about. Does the person that you're working with, or hopefully given time up for, or even doing a part-time role for, do they have that network that they can help with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. Is there anything that you wanted to speak on that maybe we missed before we wrap things up here?
I think the themes probably speak for themselves, really, for anyone that was sort of listening for the past 20 minutes. Is, yeah, figure out where you want to go and figure out what you need to get there, and the rest should sort of figure itself out. Understand what that journey looks like, and try and find, or try and do as quickly as you can, the things that will at least get you noticed, or get you within get you the ability to have a chance at an interview, if a job is what you're looking for, which I would presume anyone listening to this does want a job.
Right.
Cool.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much. This has been Board Certified, hosted by Cassandra from Achievable with Conor Heeney. And Achievable has great online courses for the USMLE Step 1, MCAT, PTCE, MPTE, CSCS, and others. You can try them out for free by going to achievable.me.